Samburu Reserve, mid-morning. The heat had already settled into the cracked skin of the Iwaso-Iro riverbed, where water once flowed but now only dry earth remained. And at the edge of that silence, just beyond a bend in the dust, lay a collapsed calf, motionless, covered in a fine layer of ochre grit. Her legs were curled underneath her in an unnatural position, as though her body had folded inward from exhaustion. Her trunk stretched limply across the dirt, its tip barely twitching. The first ranger who spotted her from a distance thought she was dead. It was only when he approached, crouched slowly beside her, and pressed the flat of his hand to her chest that he felt the whisper of breath beneath her ribs. Not strong, but present. "She's breathing," he murmured, not lifting his eyes from her still face. The calf appeared no more than 18 months old, her small tusks barely pushing through the skin. Her ears were dry and still, her skin dull with dehydration. There was no blood, no signs of an attack, no wounds to explain why she lay here alone, unmoving. But something was wrong. The patrol team stood at a distance while one of them radioed the emergency frequency. They were trained to wait quietly without crowding or touching, especially when the animal was young and vulnerable. It was not panic that guided their actions, but a calm urgency that came from experience. Within the hour, Dr. Lina Wanjiru arrived in a dusty vehicle from the field clinic stationed near Archer's Post. Lina was known across northern Kenya for her quiet precision and gentle presence in crisis. She walked slowly toward the calf, crouching a few feet away. The young elephant made no attempt to rise or flee. Her eyes opened briefly but did not focus. Her body had passed the point of alarm. Lina placed the back of her hand under the calf's jaw and counted the pulse. It was thready, slow. Her fingertips moved along the spine, checking for swelling or heat, then to the underbelly where she pressed lightly. There was no bloating, no abnormal rigidity. A basic field thermometer confirmed what her hands already knew. Her temperature was high, dangerously high. The signs pointed to heat stroke, compounded by dehydration and fatigue. But something else tugged at Lina's attention. A calf this young rarely wandered far from her mother, and yet there were no elephants nearby. No fresh tracks, no dung, no distant calls. She scanned the dry bush looking for movement, but the landscape remained still. A quiet, windless afternoon where even the birds had gone silent. A ranger laid down a canvas jacket to shade the calf's head. Lina gave instructions in a soft voice, never raising her tone. Water was poured into a metal bowl, not to drink yet, but to soak cloths for cooling the most vulnerable areas. Behind the ears, under the armpits, along the belly. The calf barely responded. Her eyes fluttered once. Her trunk twitched slightly when Lina laid a cool wrap across her side. But there was no strength left to resist. Rangers fanned out to search for signs of the herd, but each direction offered only brittle acacia branches and the rustle of dry leaves. There were no nearby footprints indicating a recent passing. Just a few faint depressions behind the calf, days old at best. She hadn't followed a herd here, she had likely been left. Whether by accident or due to illness, no one could yet say. But if the mother had abandoned her, or worse, perished, then time had already started running out. Calves this age do not survive alone in the wild. Lina took a moment to observe the body more closely. The muscles along the back twitched with shallow spasms, a sign of overheating. Her mouth was slightly open. Her breathing was labored but rhythmic. The pads of her feet were cracked, likely from walking across hot rock without pause, yet they were not caked with mud or debris. She hadn't traveled far. She had likely collapsed early that morning or the night before. "We'll need fluids," Lina said, barely above a whisper. One ranger nodded and returned to the truck to retrieve the mobile IV kit. They were trained for this, but even with the tools, survival wasn't guaranteed. The calf needed cooling, hydration, rest, and, perhaps most crucially, a chance to stand again within the next few hours. If she remained down too long, her organs would begin to fail. If they forced her up too soon, her heart might give out from the strain. It was a fine line, and they would have to walk it with care. As the day stretched on, the landscape seemed to tighten around them. The light grew harsher. The sky flattened into a colorless dome. Around the rescue site, the dust hung still in the air. A few vultures circled far off, curious but not yet descending. The team worked in near silence. Cloths were re-soaked, skin was checked for burns. The smallest signs of change, the twitch of an eyelid, the shift of a foot, were met with quiet observation, not celebration. This was not a dramatic rescue, not a charge through the bush or a triumphant cry. It was a slow, uncertain standoff with time. The calf's breath came and went like a wind barely strong enough to stir the grass. If she lifted her head before nightfall, she might survive. If she didn't, they would have to make a choice, to intervene more forcefully or let nature close its hand. For now, all they could do was wait, work, and hope. The earth beneath her was warm. The silence held. And somewhere far beyond their reach, the herd remained missing. Dr. Lena remained crouched beside the calf, her knees pressed into the warm dust as she studied the rhythm of the young elephant's chest. The breaths came thin and shallow, spaced far apart, but they came. That was enough, for now. Around her, the rangers kept still, positioned in a wide, respectful circle. No one spoke unless necessary. The calf had not moved since their arrival. Her head lay heavy against the earth, eyes half-lidded and dull. Lena reached again for the pulse point beneath the jaw. Weak? Yes, but not gone. Her fingers lingered there, quietly counting the beats beneath dry skin as if trying to hold time still. The risk had not passed. If her heart slowed further, there would be no way to bring her back. The team had begun rigging a tarp between two trucks to offer a patch of shade. One ranger gently unpacked the IV equipment and laid it on a folded cloth beside Lena. Everything was done with care. No sudden gestures, no raised voices. When Lena unwrapped the needle and tube, she worked quickly but without hurry. She pressed her palm along the calf's neck, feeling for a vein. The skin was dry. Tight from dehydration. It would be difficult, but not impossible. With a slight press of her thumb, she inserted the line and adjusted the flow of fluid. Cool saline began to drip, one drop at a time, into a body that had nearly stopped asking for help. A breeze lifted briefly across the dry grass nearby, stirring a low rustle from the thorn trees. The calf's ear moved just once, a slow twitch, no more than a reflex. Her trunk curled slightly inward, a tired arc toward her own body, then fell still again. Lena pressed the cloth against her shoulder. The skin beneath was warm, almost too warm. She soaked a second wrap and placed it beneath the jawline, then sat back and watched. Minutes passed. The fluid continued. Nothing changed. In situations like this, it was not the dramatic moments that determined survival. It was the waiting, the patient observation, the repeated cooling, the rechecking of breath. The calf's breathing hadn't worsened, but it hadn't improved either. That placed her in the fragile middle ground where one shift could decide everything. If her body accepted the fluid, her heart might strengthen. If not, her organs would begin to shut down. Either way, they would know within the hour. Lena stood slowly, stretching her back before walking toward the truck for a fresh bottle of fluid. A ranger stepped forward and quietly knelt beside the calf, holding the tubing in place. His hands remained still, his posture respectful. No one spoke. In the silence, even the sound of the drip from the IV seemed loud. When Lena returned, she took her place again and gently touched the calf's side. Her stomach rose and fell, slower now, but steady. One of the rangers whispered, "Stay with us, little one." It was the only sentence spoken for almost 10 minutes. Lena adjusted the flow slightly and pressed her stethoscope to the calf's chest. The heartbeat was faint but consistent. Sluggish, yes, but not fading. The fluids were holding her. Just enough. Her condition remained critical. If she worsened, they would have to consider sedation for transfer to the sanctuary camp. But sedating her now could send her system into collapse. The safest plan was the simplest one. Keep her here. Keep her cool. Keep her breathing. Nothing more. If she could rise on her own by dusk, there might be hope. If not, they would reevaluate. Again. The heat pressed on. The herd had not returned. No calls from the distance. No distant movement on the horizon. Just this one calf, alone, suspended between survival and stillness. Lena reapplied the cooling cloths and lightly massaged the base of one ear. The skin was soft, slightly cooler now. Another hour would tell them more. For now, it was enough that she was still here. The stakes hadn't changed. If she declined, there would be no second chance. But her pulse, for the moment, remained. The search began as the sun pulled higher into the cloudless sky. A light drone hummed above the canopy, its path steady as it followed the riverbed eastward. On the ground, 2 trackers moved quietly through the underbrush, their boots leaving soft impressions alongside older, scattered elephant prints. Every effort was made to work fast, but gentle. Time was narrowing. The calf remained behind with Lena and the others, tethered to an IV line and shaded beneath a canvas awning. Her pulse was holding, but her body was still too weak to rise. Without the presence of her herd, her chances remained uncertain. If she could be reunited, even with one familiar female, her odds of survival would increase. Without that, she was alone. The drone camera scanned the surrounding terrain for movement. Large shapes in the bush, fresh feeding patterns, disturbed soil. But the land stretched on, dry and quiet. Small herds had moved through this part of the reserve earlier in the month, pushed by dwindling water and unpredictable grazing. Still, there was always a chance. Elephants often returned to where they had last seen a missing calf. They did not always abandon their young, but as the minutes passed, there were no distant calls. No soft lowing carried by wind, just the buzz of insects and the low static of radio updates between field units. One of the trackers paused beside a cracked branch bearing a smear of mud. It was old, days old, maybe more. He crouched and brushed the dirt beside it with his fingertips. The print was too shallow to read clearly. No direction, no clear trail. He stood again, eyes scanning the horizon for movement. Nothing stirred. In the distance, heat shimmered off stone. Even the birds had gone quiet. The silence had weight now. It hung around them like heat. Back at the site, Lena gently adjusted the calf's position. With the help of 2 rangers, they rolled her slightly onto her side to prevent muscle strain. The young elephant made a faint noise, half breath, half moan, but did not struggle. The IV continued its slow rhythm. Cloths were replaced and her limbs were stretched gently to prevent stiffness. Every few minutes, Lena checked her eyes, watching for any change in pupil reaction. There was still response, but it was slow. The calf's strength remained limited. If help did not come soon, if the herd was not found, there would be no social bond left to rebuild. No emotional anchor. Her world would remain reduced to stillness, intervention, and waiting. The drone returned with nothing new to report. The signal was clear, but the air held no echoes. The trackers radioed in, no dung, no fresh trails, no vocalizations. The bush was bare. Whatever group had once passed through had moved on. The herd, if it was nearby at all, had gone silent. And that silence grew heavier with each hour. Elephants communicate across great distances with frequencies too low for humans to hear. They know when one of their own is near, injured, or lost. But today there was no answer. The calf lay alone, and the sky remained empty. Lena marked the time on her notepad. It had now been just over 4 hours since the initial contact. Her condition had stabilized but had not improved. The option of moving her was still too risky. She remained flat, unable to stand. Her ears had started to lift now and then with the wind, a small sign of returning reflex. But no attempt had been made to rise. If she remained in this position too long, circulation would begin to suffer. The team had about 6 hours of usable daylight left, and still there was no sign of the herd. A ranger walked to the edge of the clearing and scanned with binoculars. A flicker of movement caught his attention. 3 shapes, far off, grazing beneath a cluster of fever trees. But they were too small. Antelope, not what they needed. He lowered the glasses and turned back toward the camp. The calf had shifted again, only slightly. Her trunk rested beside Lena's boot. She didn't move when touched, but she didn't pull away. They would try again, fly the drone farther, send the trackers west this time. But the reality was clear. If the herd was gone, the calf would need long-term rehabilitation. And even then, the emotional bond she had lost might never return. Elephants don't forget their own, but sometimes they don't come back. A breath of wind stirred the cloth near her shoulder, and the dust danced across the ground like something remembering how to move. The decision was made when the calf's breathing, though stable, remained shallow, and her limbs had begun to stiffen from lying too long in the heat. Lena gave a quiet nod, and the team moved into motion with practiced calm. They had hoped she might rise on her own, even briefly, but the hours had passed without a single attempt to lift her head. At this point, leaving her in place any longer risked permanent damage to her joints, to her spine, to the muscles that once carried her alongside a herd now lost. If she was going to survive, she would need the shade, fluids, and equipment only the mobile unit could provide. But moving a calf of her size was not simple. It could not be rushed, and it could not be forced. Her heart remained vulnerable. Her body had not yet begun to recover. If the stress was too much, she would not recover at all. The sling was made of thick canvas, reinforced by wide straps and padded seams. 2 rangers unrolled it carefully beside her, their hands slow and deliberate. The others stood ready with soft ropes, thick gloves, and sections of tarp to wrap around the edges. Lena leaned close to the calf's side again, listening. Still slow, still weak, but steady. That had to be enough. Every movement would need to be synchronized. No pulling, no drag. Just lift and hold. And hope her body accepted the transition. A tarp was slid beneath the calf first, pulled gently from one side to the other, bunching slightly at the folds of her legs. She did not resist. Her eyes remained open but dim, her trunk slack against the ground. The sling followed. Each strap was fed beneath her frame and adjusted to avoid pressure on the ribs or spine. She gave one low, hoarse sound as they moved her shoulder, but there was no fight in it. Her body simply yielded to their hands. As they lifted her for the first time, the weight of her condition became clearer. She hung heavy and motionless in the cradle of fabric, legs bent inward, tail limp. The entire team supported her, 6 hands on the sling, 2 guiding her head, Lena steadying the line with one hand on the pulse point beneath her jaw. The calf gave another sound, softer now. Not pain exactly, more the voice of something lost, suspended, unsure of where to reach. They carried her a few meters to the shaded bed laid out beneath the mobile tent. The space had been prepared earlier with thick mats, cooling cloths, and a quiet generator powering a portable monitor. She was laid down slowly, with care taken to support her head as it met the cushion. The moment the straps were released, Lena checked her again. The pulse had quickened slightly, but not dangerously. Her eyes fluttered once, and for the first time, her ears gave a small but clear response, a half-fold backward, then open again. It was not a sign of alertness, it was reflex. But it was something. The IV was reconnected, fluids flowing steadily now through the line along her leg. Another set of cloths was dampened and pressed along her back. A small battery-powered fan was angled low to circulate air beneath the canopy. The team stepped back, hands on their knees, watching quietly. No one spoke for a long time. Every movement had been precise, every choice measured. They had done what they could. What happened next would no longer be decided by their efforts alone. Lena knelt beside the calf again and placed her palm gently on the arch between her eye and ear. The skin was warmer but less dry. She whispered the only words she had spoken all afternoon. "You're almost there." The calf didn't lift her head, but her chest rose, slow and steady, beneath the weight of air and light and touch. Outside the canopy, the wind moved faintly through the grass. A single feather of dust lifted and fell again without sound. The night air settled low across the camp, quiet and cool, stretching in slow waves over the dry grass. The wind had dropped some time after dusk, leaving only the hum of insects and the muted shuffle of fabric in the trees. Under the soft shelter of the mobile tent, the calf lay as she had for hours, her body still swaddled in damp cloths, her limbs carefully supported by rolled pads. Her breath had grown deeper as the evening fell. Not strong, but fuller, more rhythmic, no longer desperate. The IV had been reduced gradually, and Lena had chosen not to sedate. The calf needed to feel this moment, to come back to her body slowly, if she was going to recover enough strength to stand. Movement, however small, would be the signal they were waiting for. The rangers worked in shifts through the night, checking her vitals every hour, replenishing water, watching for signs of discomfort or strain. Lena remained at her side longer than most. Occasionally, she adjusted the ear wrap or brushed a new film of dust from the calf's trunk. The team had done all they could. Now it was hers to decide. The stakes hadn't changed. If her strength continued to build overnight, she might attempt to lift her head. If not, morning would bring heavier choices. For now, her body lay quiet under the stars, suspended in that thin space between healing and collapse. It was close to midnight when the change came, a shift so soft it nearly went unnoticed. The ranger on duty had just risen to replace the water jug when a sound broke the stillness. A long, trembling cry, low, hollow, wavering through the dark. Not loud, not panicked, but real. The calf's mouth parted slightly. Her trunk moved, not outward but upward, curling faintly beneath her chin before falling again with a thud too soft to echo. Lena, already awake nearby, approached in silence. The calf's head remained down, but her ears had shifted, lifting briefly in a slow, outward flick. When Lena pressed a fresh cloth to the base of her neck, the ear twitched again, this time more clearly, a reflex beginning to return. Another small sound followed. Not a cry this time, more a breath pressed into noise. Shaky, soft, intentional. The team gathered around her slowly without speaking. It was not yet a turning point, but it was a step. The calf had moved without stimulation. She had cried out in the dark without prompt. That meant the systems in her body were regaining connection. Reflexes were returning. Sensation was spreading back through the limbs. She was waking, not fully, not easily, but undeniably. They watched as her leg shifted ever so slightly, pressing down into the mat as if testing what strength remained. It did not last. Within minutes, she returned to stillness. But something had broken through. She had made a sound. She had responded to touch. She had called out into a night that held no answer. Lena reached down, pressing the backs of her fingers to the calf's chest. The pulse was faster now, and steady. Her breathing had increased slightly, not dangerously but with purpose. The sudden cry had taken effort. That was clear. But her body hadn't crashed in response. No wild heart rate, no shallow collapse. Instead, she had settled again, as if relieved by her own voice. It was the first audible expression she'd made since collapsing at the river. It mattered. She was still here, still trying. Outside the tent, the land remained unchanged, dry, still, endless. The herd had not returned. No fresh signs had been found during the evening search. Drones would go out again at first light. Until then, the calf would remain in the care of human hands. Her life was not yet secured. She had not stood. She had not fed. But the boundaries had shifted. Her silence had broken. Her ears had moved. Her body had begun to speak again, in small ways. And for those who waited beside her, that was enough to keep going. In the distance, the grass stirred once in the dark, then stilled again, folding gently into the quiet. The early light came pale and without warmth, filtering through the canvas of the mobile shelter in quiet folds. The calf hadn't made another sound since her cry in the night. But something had shifted in her body. Her breathing was more even. Her trunk now curled softly toward her chest rather than lying slack across the mat. When the first ranger approached just after dawn, she lifted her ear in response to his footsteps, then let it fall again, heavy but aware. It wasn't recovery, not yet, but it was something new. A sign that her body was waking slowly, that the distance between life and death was no longer widening. Lena arrived minutes later. Sleeves rolled to the elbows, her movements unhurried as always. She knelt beside the calf, placing her hand gently along the arch of her neck, feeling for the pulse beneath the ear. It was slower than in the night, but still strong. The air around them remained cool from the fading darkness, but by mid-morning the heat would return. She soaked a clean cloth in cool water and pressed it behind the calf's ear, careful not to disturb the IV line. The skin there was warmer than the night before, less brittle. Another cloth followed, this time placed beneath the chin where the jaw met the throat. The calf stirred under the pressure, not with discomfort but with something closer to acknowledgement. Lena adjusted the support under her head, lifting it slightly to ease the angle of her spine. The movement drew a soft breath from the calf, followed by a long, slow exhale. Then something happened. As Lena placed her palm gently beneath the elephant's cheek, the calf shifted. Not much, not all at once, but just enough to press her weight downward into the shape of that hand. No force, no flinch, only the quiet acceptance of contact. It wasn't dramatic, it didn't signal immediate recovery, but for an animal born into a world of touch, of warmth, of herd, this moment meant something. A signal sent and received. 2 rangers approached with fresh cloths, their boots brushing softly through the dust. They paused at the edge of the tent, waiting for Lena's nod before moving closer. The calf's eye opened as they neared, not fully, not alert, but watching. Her body remained still, but she didn't shy away. Another cloth was pressed along her flank, the moisture darkening her side in a slow, spreading shape. Her skin twitched slightly under the cool, and then settled again. The pressing into Lena's hand continued. Barely there, but unmistakable. The kind of pressure that comes not from strength, but from the fragile instinct to lean toward what feels safe. The calf's ears flicked again, slower this time, and the smallest tremor ran along the line of her shoulder. No attempt to rise, no vocal sound. Just that one silent gesture, made with the weight of a head and the trust of a body too weak to defend itself. Lena didn't speak at first. There was nothing to say that would shift what was already happening. Instead, she steadied her hand, letting the calf's head rest more completely. For a long minute, no one moved. When she finally whispered, the words were simple. "It's okay, girl." The calf didn't answer, but she didn't pull away. The risk remained. She had not stood. She had not nursed. The damage done by heat and dehydration could still unfold over the coming hours, but the moment had shifted. She was no longer bracing against the world. She was moving into it, even if only by inches. That fragile lean into Lena's hand carried no promises, but it carried weight. It was enough to hold on to. Outside the shelter, the air grew warmer. A low breeze moved slowly across the dry field, lifting a few strands of dust into soft, wandering spirals. Somewhere far beyond sight, the land waited. And under the edge of shade, the calf let her full weight rest quietly in the cradle of a human palm. By late afternoon, the day had returned to stillness. The sun hung low, its light stretched long and golden across the thornveld. The air held a weight, not of heat now, but of waiting. The calf remained under the canvas, resting with her head turned slightly toward the breeze. Her body had cooled. The IV had been disconnected an hour ago. Her breathing was steady. She hadn't stood yet, but she had tried, twice, lifting her chest only a few inches before slipping back to the mat, exhausted but alive. The team didn't push. Each movement she made now came from her alone, and that mattered. On the ridge above the camp, 2 rangers stood with binoculars, scanning the horizon. Their eyes traced each rise of dust, each shift in color beyond the trees. At first, there was nothing. Then, behind the edge of an acacia grove nearly half a kilometer out, a shape moved. Broad, dark, slow, then another, then 2 more. A family group, walking in a loose line, their pace unhurried but directed. The rangers watched in silence. One raised a radio and reported what they saw. 4 individuals, 2 adults, 1 juvenile, 1 younger calf. They were grazing with purpose, and though no urgency marked their steps, they moved steadily toward the old riverbed. Lena walked to the edge of the clearing and took the binoculars. The light was softer now, the kind that deepens each outline and blurs the space between distance and memory. She found the lead matriarch quickly, her walk confident, her body lean from drought, her ears broad and swaying. And then a detail caught her attention. The right tusk was broken, jagged at the edge, worn flat, unmistakable. Lena lowered the binoculars and exhaled once. She had seen that female before. The mark was recorded. The matriarch had a history in this region. She was part of the northern cluster that occasionally passed through Samburu during seasonal transitions. It was possible. It was more than possible. Back under the canvas, the calf stirred. Her ear lifted once, then settled again. She hadn't cried out, but her head shifted faintly, angled toward the direction of the ridge. A ranger moved quietly to check on her, but Lena raised her hand. Not yet. The wind was picking up, carrying scents and low sounds not easily heard by human ears. The adult elephants moved closer, their shapes more visible now against the light. They paused occasionally to feed, but their direction remained unchanged. No vocalizations had been heard, but elephants didn't always need sound to speak. They knew what they were looking for, or at least they knew something was missing. The team waited. No one spoke. The young calf's head lifted slightly, held longer this time. Her trunk curled toward the air, not high, not with force, but enough to catch scent. She held it there for several seconds before letting it fall gently across the mat. Her chest rose in a deeper breath. Her body stayed low. She did not attempt to stand. But the motion had returned, quiet and deliberate. She had sensed something. By the time the elephants came into full view near the lower plain, the sun was nearly touching the horizon. The sky had turned to amber. Dust rose softly behind the herd's steps. The matriarch paused and faced the direction of the shelter, her ears slowly spreading wide. She did not approach. She simply stood, waiting, as if listening for something only she would recognize. The rest of the herd grazed nearby, unhurried. Still the matriarch held her position. The team dared not move. The calf lifted her head again, longer this time, and held it steady. She did not cry out, but her eyes opened fully now, and for the first time since she had been found, they focused on something beyond the space she lay in. A moment later, the matriarch took a single step forward. In the quiet that followed, no one reached for tools or spoke instructions. The risks were still present. The calf was not strong enough to walk alone. A reunion, if attempted too early, could end in collapse, but the recognition between two quiet forms, standing apart in the soft wind, said something the team could not. In the last light of day, the grass shifted gently between them, and dust from the herd's passage hung like gold above the plain. The matriarch had held her position through the last moments of dusk, unmoving beneath the weight of the sky. Her ears remained wide, her eyes fixed in the direction of the shelter. No sound passed between her and the calf. Only stillness, only distance. The younger members of her group grazed quietly nearby, pulling dry stalks from the ground with slow, practiced motion. They seemed unaware of the tension that bound the space between them and the humans, but the matriarch knew. She waited as if something had called her here, and she would not move again until it called her back. Inside the camp, Lena stood just behind the canvas edge, her hand resting lightly on the calf's flank. The young elephant had been sitting upright for nearly 20 minutes now, legs folded, trunk curled at her side. Her body trembled with each shift, her breaths slow and deep, but she remained alert, not restless, not confused, aware. The weight of the day had softened in her shoulders, and the will to move was no longer far away. The sling, once prepared for transport, had been quietly folded away. This would not be a forced reunion. It had to come from her. They waited a little longer. No one speaking, no hands reaching. Then, with no signal, the calf leaned forward, her legs tensed, strained, and lifted. Her body shook under the effort. She paused, adjusted, and tried again. The second time, she found her footing, wobbly and unsteady, but standing. Her ears flicked against her neck. Her trunk hovered low to the earth. She stood still for several seconds, then turned, slowly, until her body faced the ridge. The air carried the scent of old dust, sweat, and bark. But among it, something else had returned, a scent that memory knew. She stepped forward, then paused. Lena moved beside her, no longer as caretaker, but as witness. The calf took another step, then another. It was not quick. Her legs dragged slightly, and the muscles in her back quivered with strain. But she moved, and each time her foot met the ground, she steadied a little more. As she reached the edge of the canvas, she stopped. Her trunk curled upward and brushed softly against Lena's chest, holding there for just a moment. Not tight, not desperate, a gesture of presence, of goodbye. Lena didn't move. She simply lowered her hand once more and let it rest against the calf's cheek. "Go on," she whispered. The calf turned again, this time with clearer purpose. Her steps widened, her body learning how to carry itself again. She walked through the last stretch of open dust, heading toward the line of thorn trees and dry grass where the herd waited. As she neared, the matriarch stepped forward. She didn't trumpet or rush. She simply met her, shoulder to shoulder, trunk to side, and paused. The calf collapsed gently against her, pressing her face into the older elephant's chest. The matriarch leaned her weight in return, accepting. There was no sound, no celebration. The herd simply began to move again, slower now, turning east. The calf stayed close to her mother's side, stumbling once but never falling. The others did not look back. They moved as one, as they always had, into the long field where the wind moved through tall grass and light shifted toward night. Behind them, the camp grew quiet. Lena stood alone beneath the dimming sky, watching until even the dust had settled. The last thing visible was a small, unsteady figure walking into the wind, no longer alone.